And now may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. Amen. Next month will be my 40th high school anniversary, and there is a reunion planned, as you might imagine, to which I will not be going. Despite the entreaties of my best friend, who I met there and loved dearly like a brother, to go, I will not go for a couple different reasons. One of which is I went to 3 high schools. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. And when you go to 13 different schools of your life, it's kind of hard to build up a feeling of love and brotherhood to people when you're bouncing around every couple of years. The other reason is I went to my 20th high school reunion against my better judgment in a way, and kind of got what you would expect, which was a lot of, yeah, good to see you, and who are you again exactly, and what is your name? So I don't need to spend time and money to go be ignored in a different place. That's not something I necessarily want to do. My mother was the exact opposite, because she grew up in the same small town and never moved and grew up with the same people from kindergarten through high school and then went on to college with many of them. And her bonds with those people were so strong, she was still getting together with them when they were in their 70s and into their 80s. And reunions to her were the highlight of her life. To go back and relive those days. You know what? In some way, I always thought it was kind of sad that you would reach the peak of your life and the happiness of your life at age 18. Because really, her life after that wasn't that happy for her. Unhappy marriage, divorce, lots of other stuff. So really, for her, the pinnacle of her life was that time at 18. And she had yearbooks and pictures and went to all the reunions, headed the reunion at one time. And oh, she just loved that. She lived to do that, to go back and to kind of relive the past. She was always looking back in her life rather than forward, which is exactly what our readings this morning tell us not to do. Now, be careful here. When we say don't look back, that doesn't mean you can't look back with fondness on your past. That doesn't mean you have to completely sever all ties with everyone and just, ignore everything that happened to you. That doesn't mean that at all. It's perfectly fine to have people and things and friends from the past. It's just don't live in it and don't look back at it more than you're looking forward, especially in a spiritual sense. And that's, again, what we're seeing, and I think, in our readings this morning. First, in the Old Testament, Elijah is ready to give up his ministry and go to be with God. And the successor apparently is going to be Elisha. And so when the two meet, Elisha tells Elijah, let me go back and say goodbye first. Let me go back and take care of business. And basically Elijah says, what is that to me? It's no skin off my nose. Do what you got to do. So Elisha goes back. Now that's completely different, seemingly, than the advice we get from Jesus in our gospel reading, which is basically, don't go back at all. Hey, I need to go back and bury my father. Hey, don't even worry about that. You let the dead bury the dead. And you keep going forward and keep your eyes fixed on the big picture. So here we have seemingly couple different things going on that we find a little hard to understand. First of all, Jesus seems like a very hard guy. Very hard. I mean, who would tell somebody, look, your dad's dead, just leave him. Don't even worry about it. Let somebody else take care of that. I mean, if you look at certain passages of the Bible, you get the picture that Jesus was not exactly promoting family harmony. In other places, he said, if anyone does not hate father and mother and brother and sister, he is not fit to be my disciple. So that kind of strikes us as odd. Right off the bat, Jesus just comes across as really hard. And then we've got this seeming contradiction where it seems to be okay in the Old Testament to do something, to go back and bury your father, but not okay in the New Testament. So we have one of those seeming contradictions in the Bible. So what is going on? Well, what Jesus is really telling us here, and of course there is no contradiction, what Jesus is really telling us is, look, keep your eyes, spiritually speaking, focused forward and make me the most important thing in your life to the exclusion of everything else. That is, I want to be number one. I want to be the number one top priority in your life. And that means more important than your family. That's why we get that where Jesus said, if you don't hate your family, he wasn't saying, hey, I want you to hate your family. What he's saying is, I want you to love me more. I want you to love me more than your family. And when Jesus called his disciples, remember, Peter and that group, what does the Bible tell us? Immediately they left everything, including their families, to follow him. Again, Jesus is not saying hate your family. He's not saying abandon your family. What he's saying is keep your eyes focused on me and make me the most important thing in your life, not your family, not your job, not your money, not your friends, nothing. Jesus wants to be at the top. And so what these lessons are really telling us is keep your eyes fixed forward on Jesus and keep moving forward. Because see, what we like to do, spiritually speaking now, is we like to straddle the present and the past. We like to look back nostalgically at the way things were in our life. Not necessarily the friends and the parties and that thing, but when I say we want to look back nostalgically, what I'm saying is we want to look back when our lives were sinful. We want to look back at that old life of sin and death. And believe it or not, we like to look back at it fondly. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about don't look back. Don't look back at that old life of sin and death that leads you nowhere. Don't do that. Keep your eyes focused forward, because all that old life is going to do is going to get you into trouble. Now you may be thinking, well, how can anybody look back at that stuff? People do that all the time. All the time. There are young married couples. And after a period of time, you might hear one of them say, usually the guy, but can be the girl too, oh man, I sure miss the good old days. The good old days when I was free and I could go out and carouse around with my friends and go out and have fun and drink, and I wasn't attached to the old ball and chain. Oh, those were the good old days. That's looking back into a past that is sinful. That's looking back wistfully and wishfully and hopefully at a place in your life that's been corrupted by the flesh. And a perfect example of that is Lot's wife from Genesis. God is going to go into Sodom and Gomorrah. He's going to destroy it because the unbelievable, unrepentant sin that's going on there. But he's going to spare Lot and his family. And he says, get out of town, Lot, but whatever you do, don't look back. Now, it's not the physical act of looking back that's bad. It's not that somebody looking back is going to see this fire and brimstone and that's a terrible thing. What God is really warning against is don't look back at that old sin, at that old destruction, at that old death, and wish you were still there in it, doing it. And that's what happened to Lot's wife. That's what happened to Lot's wife. She looked back, and the act of her looking back was her looking back wistfully at that old life, thinking, oh boy, those were the good old days back when I could do what I wanted, and there weren't any rules and regulations, and this God wasn't telling me what to do all the time. And that's what God doesn't want. And that's why he turned her to a pillar of salt. She looked back. She looked back at the old life of sin and looked back at it, and it was appealing to her. And we're supposed to lead and live a new life, a changed life, a life for God. Because if you look back, chances are you're going to be dragged back into it, because that's what Satan is trying to do. He's trying to drag you and me back into that old life of sin and flesh where we're in control. And you may not think it, but that's true. And that temptation is there for all of us every day. I've been going to these meetings of this alcohol and addiction recovery group, faith-based group called Brianna's Hope. And to hear them talk, you can hear that so plainly. Oh, there are times when I want to go back and I want to take that drink and I want to be with my old friends. You can hear the physical craving that they have to go back to that old life. And they know they can't. And that's what they're finding. And that's what you and I are finding as well. Elisha goes back. He goes back, but he doesn't stay there. What does he do? He slaughters his oxen and burns them with the wood from the yoke. In other words, what is he doing? He's destroying any means of living in that old life. Any means or thought Elisha had of going back to his old life is gone. The oxen are dead. The wood is gone. He can't go back to his old life. He's got to go forward. And that's exactly what God wants from us, to go forward. Not to stand with one foot in each and longingly want to go back to the old ways of sin and death. And again, don't misunderstand. It's perfectly fine to go to reunions. It's perfectly fine to be with old friends and to remember the past fondly and to think about that and to go through your old yearbooks. That can be a lot of fun. But spiritually speaking, we can't. We have got to look forward, because the old sinful life is always trying to drag us back into death and destruction. And we have got to go forward with Jesus. Like Elisha, we've got to burn everything that connects us to that old sinful life of the flesh and walk forward into a new life with Christ. When it comes to your spiritual life, don't look back. Amen.